morning, good afternoon, or good evening, my fine friends. Today I'm bringing you a special Christmas episode, which had originally intended to be a Christmas Day release, but a few factors combined to make that impossible. Mainly just running out of time with Christmas and family and whatnot. So I'm releasing this for you today. This episode talks about the fantastic documentary Somewhere You Feel Free, The Making of Wildflowers. And I thought that I'd switch things up a little with this episode and go off script, more or less. So what I did was I sat down, watched the documentary again, and jotted down some notes. And what I'm going to do is talk through those notes. I've got my notepad here. I'll look through those notes and talk about what I wrote down and anything else that comes to mind. And hopefully you enjoy that change of gears just for this one-off. I'm also recording the video for this one. So if you want to watch me talk about this, it will be on YouTube. And the last thing is I'm not going to edit this. I'm just going to leave it as is, because usually I edit out all my clicks and that and redos. If I have to redo anything, I'll go through it and you'll see it, what's and all. Before we start though, massive props to Mary Wharton, who directed the film, and I'd really love to get her on the podcast at some point to talk about the process of putting this together. As I'm sure there's just a ton of sort of things that we didn't see in the final thing, and sort of try to pick her brain about how she chose which footage to use and how to sort of knit that together into something that's so cohesive and so emotional and connective with Tom Petty fans and with the music, and bringing that album together to life in a unique way. So anyway, let's get into the doc and my notes. Before we start, though, I should say, look at my face. If you see, I went for an 11 km run today, and you can see here I've got a little bit of frost in it, because it's minus 26 here in Saskatoon, and I just leaned away from the mic there. It's minus 26 in Saskatoon, and it's probably definitely time for me to go full face mask rather than trying to run with none. So, all right, so let's get into it. So, I'm just going to read one of the title cards from earlier on in the documentary. In early 2020, a collection of 16mm film was discovered in the Tom Petty archive. Wouldn't we all like to get into the Tom Petty archive? Shot between 1993 and 1995 by Petty's longtime filmographer, Martin Atkins, while Petty was recording the Wildflowers album and on the tour that followed. Most of this has never been seen before. So, one of my first notes here is that I love the goofy shot of him messing around with the trumpet. And throughout the documentary, you definitely get a sense that Tom Petty had a fantastic sense of humor. And there was a lot of levity and a lot of spirit within those sessions. And of course, the music being recorded properly and being, the sort of care being given to the songs would have been first and foremost, that would have been the main target of all these sessions. But there was definitely, like I said, that lightness of touch and that sort of that levity in everything that he did. So I really enjoyed seeing that come through. And I also love the way that Mary Wharton introduces Rick Rubin's involvement. So what I wrote down was, he's produced some monumental albums, but when you sit and listen to him talking about Wildflowers, it clearly stands out for him. And he talks about Full Moon Fever being his intro into Tom Petty and not really being a big Tom Petty fan before then, because he's a hardcore punk guy and a rap guy and everything else. So Tom Petty, you could see, would have not necessarily been on his radar. But Full Moon Fever, he said, he listened to it just thousands of times driving around LA, and listened to it in his car. And I think that for someone like Rick Rubin to really latch onto Tom Petty shows you that he really is an artist for all seasons, for all generations, and for all sort of musical tastes. And one of the things that he says in the documentary that I resonate with completely was, how can there be this many good songs from one person? Now, I remember when I got into Tom Petty and I started digging back, and we all know the hits. We all know the greatest hits. We all know Full Moon Fever, which a lot of the greatest hits are off. But then when you dig back into, as I did, you dig back into the catalogue, and it's just album after album after album after album of just song after song after song of just top-notch quality. And I remember that really blew my mind too, and it was one of the things that sort of gave me that impetus to really start listening to Tom Petty, much more fervently. There's a clip where there's a bit where I think it's maybe in sound check or rehearsal for one of the shows, where Tom's talking to Howie and Steve Ferroni, and this again goes back to sort of Tom's sense of humor, obviously. And he says something funny, and Howie just cracks up, and you can see him sort of almost doubled over, and you see that great big Steve Ferroni smile. And I think that, again, that sort of, it was filmed surreptitiously, and I don't think they knew they were on camera. That obviously they knew the cameras were there, but they weren't aware of being filmed. So I love that sort of the natural spirit of what it must have been like hanging out backstage and being a part of Tom's band. So I really enjoyed that bit too. I've got a lot of notes here, but I might have to cut some of them out. We find out too that Good to Be King was the first demo that Rick Rubin listened to. And man, what a first track to work from. I can only imagine that on hearing that song, Rick Rubin must have thought, okay, well, this is going to be a good project. Obviously, this guy's still got a few things up his sleeve. And again, then you see at that point that we bring in Michael Kamen for all the orchestral arrangements. And again, just think about at that point in Tom's career, the people that he could leverage and call on to sort of bring something special in. And when you bring in Rick Rubin, you're bringing in Michael Kamen, we find out later that he brings in Steve Ferroni. You're getting all these sort of external influences that really elevate this idea and this project to a place that the Heartbreakers alone, and maybe even with Jimmy Iovine, probably wouldn't have hit the same heights, I don't think. And Benmont says, Benmont, and it's shortly after that, Benmont says that, you almost take for granted that Tom is going to come in with something great, with a great song. And so I think there is that sense that, and he says later on that, you kind of, that becomes a little bit, you can become complacent when you have such a gifted songwriter in your band. But I think that one of the things that does set the Heartbreakers apart, even though this is a solo record, is that I don't think they ever really did that. I think that they knew that Tom would deliver the goods, and then they had to as well. They had to deliver their goods. They had to sort of match or surpass what he was bringing and bring something unique and important and special to the song themselves. So when he set that bar really, really high, I think other people's talented musicians like Benmont Tench and Mike Campbell, Steve Ferroni, Scott Thurston, they just feed off that, right? So, and the other thing I was wondering too, I made a note here, but I wonder, because the cameras obviously were prevalent during that whole recording process, and I do sometimes wonder whether that ever stifled the creative process, or whether they actually maybe sometimes said, like, can you just turn the cameras off for a little while? Because it would be quite annoying to have a camera in your face the whole time. And you really get that sense that even when they're just practicing or demoing, there's obviously someone's videoing, and then you get the guy with the camera taking stills. It might get a little bit much sometimes, so I kind of wonder what the dynamic of that was, which would be another good question to ask maybe Mike Campbell or Ben Tench someday. One of my favorite moments of the documentary was when Tom and Benmont are in one of the sound booths. I think it's probably this piano sound booth, and they're just playing through Wildflowers. And Benmont's laying there in this, slick, and you can hear the beginnings of that piano part that comes in sort of later in the song, where he's playing a little bit more of an arpeggio and he's playing a little bit more freely, and it's not just keeping the chords together. With Tom sitting there playing the acoustic guitar and singing the vocals over top. It's just, I love those moments of watching a band play together, even just two people or three people in a band playing together and figuring out a song and just playing through it. I always enjoy watching those types of things. Okay, my next note about Wildflowers, Tom, and I found this really interesting as a hobbyist amateur songwriter, said that song came to him basically fully formed. Lyrics, music, just one go. He sat down in his home studio, hit record, and just played the whole thing through. He had the vocals, the lyrics, everything, the melody, the whole thing, and sort of sat and listened to, well, what do I change? What do we add? What do we take out? And decided that actually it's probably pretty good as it is. I think it's a really good insight into the workings of a musical genius mind, that sometimes those things happen. I think sometimes people imagine that's always the way it is, that songs just fall out of artists. Well, no, songs are a lot of work a lot of the time, and they talk about that later in the documentary, about sometimes you've got to go through the work of writing a song, but sometimes those songs really do just fall out of the sky, and Wildflowers was one of them, and I think it is one of the most natural sounding songs Tom ever recorded. Another wonderful thing I enjoy about the documentary is the way that the talking head pieces that focused solely on Rick Rubin, when he's talking about his involvement in the process, or he's talking about the project as a whole, they're shot very grainy. And that's just a nice aesthetic, artistic touch that Mary Wharton has a creative decision that she's made to present that footage in that way, which just gives it, again, it's almost got that art house kind of feel to it. Another note I've made about Harry Green, a song that is on obviously All the Rest but didn't make it onto the final album, with that guitar lick. I think that as that song wasn't released at the time, Tom still knew there was definitely something there, and obviously it's the same guitar lick from Angel Dream, more or less, right? So I love that idea again, that when you write a song, and even sometimes if you record a song, but it doesn't quite make the cut, you keep those elements. You think, well, I might be able to recycle that. I might be able to bring that into something else, or just change it very slightly, or adapt it and make it work for a different song idea or a different lyric or something. So I think that was super cool to watch that. Oh, and another thing on Harry Green, I often wonder whether the protagonist in that song is gay, because if you think about the lyrics and where they go, I can see that being a very very socially conscious lyric. And maybe that's the reason that it kind of didn't end up making the cut in the end, because it didn't quite fit thematically. But to me, that's always been a song about an outsider, but he's an outsider for a reason. He's not just an outsider. There's a very specific reason that keeps Harry Green apart from everyone else. And Tom, sort of says in the lyrics that he was cool with Harry Green, which implies that some people weren't. So I wonder if that's the reason. Of course, one of the other things that many people have commented through Tom Petty Nation and on the online forums and whatnot, and in the YouTube comments, is that this is another time we get to spend a little bit of time with not only Tom, but with Howie Epstein, who obviously left us far too early. And so he's such a gentle, wonderful spirit that anytime you see Howie in that footage, it gets you a little bit. It's a little bit bittersweet, where you remember how good he was and how phenomenally he sounded with Tom. And Tom even talks about, I think I've made another note somewhere else, maybe I'll talk about that, but he says that, if there's anyone I want to sing with, it's Howie. He's the guy who I, vocally just works well with, and would rather sing with than anyone else. So, one of the things I think the documentary exposes as well is that, or does a good job of sort of clarifying, is why Wildflowers is a solo record rather than a Heartbreakers record. Because apart from Stan, obviously, and we'll get into that a little bit maybe, but all the Heartbreakers played on the record. But thematically and where the songs came from, Tom wasn't writing these for the Heartbreakers. He was writing them, they were coming out of him as an individual. And they have, a lot of the songs have such a personal feel that I think it's right that it's considered a solo album rather than a Heartbreakers record. And I think that the narrative through the documentary really sort of clarifies that and shows you that everyone else is cool with that. Benmont's okay with that, and Benmont's said later that it was somewhat mystifying that it was a solo album or a Heartbreakers record. But I think in retrospect, when you look at that and you say, okay, well, these songs were were written from a very specific point in Tom's life, that it had to be a solo record, really, and it gave him that freedom to bring in Michael Kamen, to audition different drummers, different bass players originally before they said, well, no, it's got to be Howie, right? So I totally get why it is a solo record rather than a Heartbreakers record. There's a bit on To Find a Friend, when the footage there where they're all sitting around in the round, and it's great watching Tom walk the band through the chord changes, because that's a fairly non-standard chord progression in To Find a Friend, and you can see how he's fumbling it a little bit because he's not quite sure where the changes are. And so again, anyone who's ever played in a band or written a song or been in the studio, that's a process that, yeah, you got to go, no, it doesn't go from E to A, it goes from E to F sharp. So there's different little bits and pieces at play there that show those band dynamics, and they show a band. That's how bands work. They play with each other. Well, that sounds wrong, doesn't it? They play against each other, and figure things out as they go. And Adria says in the documentary that I think either just before or during the making of Wildflowers, Tom had started going to therapy, which again I think maybe that helped him unlock a way to express himself emotionally in a different way or a more direct way. Because again, I think the songs that are very clearly personal on this record they're expressed a lot more clearly than on previous records. So that was an interesting sort of tidbit to take away from it. Um, so they talk about too. I mean, obviously the situation with Stan, and Stan had to leave, but then they did the two songs for Greatest Hits. And one thing I thought that was kind of cool was that Tom says that those were the past Greatest Hits. They just, oh sorry, no, Rick Rubin talks about it. He says that Tom viewed those songs as being, well, that's the Greatest Hits is the past, and Wildflowers is the future. And I think that any Tom Petty fan recognizes that. I mean, I always think of Tom's work in three periods. There's the early period, the middle period, and then the late period. But Wildflowers definitely within that middle period to me is a real sort of an actual turning point. Like he started writing songs at just a different level, just incredibly artistically dense, and lyrically more, I would say, more clinical in word selection and those types of things. And I think Mike Campbell says in the documentary that Tom was a student of words. He loved the English language, was very well read. He used to like watching old movies. And so I think having that sense of lyrical dexterity, which he always had, and, were definitely prevalent on those early albums, just really ramped up from Wildflowers on. So yeah, I enjoyed sort of reading about that. Another part that I like in the documentary is when Steve Ferrone comes in. And obviously Steve Ferrone with that big smile, that huge smile, that huge charisma, that huge presence, that huge positivity, which everyone else commented on. And he said, as he arrived, Kenny Aronoff's kit's coming out, which wasn't hugely unusual. But when he saw that it was Tom Petty and Mike Campbell in the control room, he was like, okay. Which, can you imagine going into that environment? Even as great a drummer as Steve is, going into an environment where you're expected to pick up and record on some of these songs that obviously mean a hell of a lot to the songwriter, could be intimidating. I don't think it probably was for Steve because he's such a consummate professional and such an amazing session drummer and a brilliant musician all around. So one of the other things we find out on the album is that they didn't play to a click, so there's no metronome in any of those songs. It was a natural sort of what they call it, earthy and natural. No clicks, no drum machines. And so on a few of the songs they say that Steve would just play hi-hat and they would play along to that. And of course Steve Ferrone's got great timing, great rhythm, but they'll play along to that, and so you do get that human feel to it, which in juxtaposition to the stuff that Jeff Lynne did, which is very produced and they're great records, and great pop songs, but it's a little bit different. You just get a different feel from that. And again, through the documentary, you do get the sense that the process of making the album was as important to everyone, especially to Tom. It was as important as the output. And Rick Rubin says, I enjoyed our time in the studio every single day. Which, again, you probably should, right? I mean, if you're going to create something, everyone should be relaxed. Everyone should be having a good time, hopefully. And Mike talks about, trying to make every song the best song that they ever wrote, which is such a cool way to approach making music. You're not going in, let's just get 10 tracks down. And that some of them are going to be killer. That some of them maybe going to be a little bit of filler. Tom Petty never approached things that way. Make this song, the song that we're recording today, or the song that we're working on right now, make it the best damn song that we've ever recorded. And again, it's hard to argue with the outcome of the sessions, because Wildflowers is my favorite album of all time, I would say. So, and Benmont says, we're trying to do what we always did, to do it really well. And he says that if you black out while, I can't remember which track he was talking about. Crawling Back to You, I think. He says if you black out while playing the track, and you're stone cold sober, that's a very good sign, because it means you're inside the music. I think any musician will know that if you play a song and you don't remember playing the song, that's a pretty good thing, as long as you did it well. Speaking of Crawling Back to You, Steve Ferrone mentions that he has a tattoo about that line. Most things I worry about never happen anyway, and it's a line that I think all Tom Petty songs really love. And I think that the whole lyric of that song is just otherworldly. It's such a superb piece of craftsmanship and artistry. Where are we at now? I was talking about I made a note here that as a music nerd, one of the things I love most about the documentary is the band jams. Again, just when you see 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 people sitting in a room playing music together and looking at each other and watching for cues and waiting for things to happen, and or someone even just saying, well, this is the key change or whatever it is. I really enjoy those because it just shows that songs, again, as I said earlier, songs don't fall out of the sky. They're created, they're crafted, and they have to be honed and polished and made to work by a group of very, very talented musicians. And we all know that Wildflowers was originally intended to be a double album, essentially, and we got that eventually with Wildflowers and All the Rest. But it comes out that Tom always had final say on sequencing, but kind of got scared off a little bit by the record company saying, no, I don't think a double album can sell. Well, Wildflowers and All the Rest became the quickest selling album that they ever released, showing I think it went, triple platinum within 8 weeks or something like that, I think it said. Which shows the record company that, no, there's an appetite for those types of works, and that maybe you missed a beat there. I think one of the overall notes that was left quite late in the documentary that sort of sums things up was when Tom says that he wasn't in any hurry to finish it. And I definitely get that sense that, again, that the process of making the album was just so enjoyable, and obviously an escape for him because he was going through a really tough time in his life, especially with his marriage breaking down and whatnot. And Adria says that she knew when she listened that this was sort of the divorce album. She knew that her mum and dad were getting divorced, which is really sad. But I think that there's a maybe a slightly morbid beauty to that as well. That Tom was able to finally draw a line under a part of his life that wasn't fulfilling and was causing him hurt, and so to be able to get out of that and get into the studio, create something so beautiful, even in the midst of one of the darkest periods in his life. Kind of reminds me a little bit of Beethoven, and some of the stuff that he wrote in his later years, despite the fact that he was almost completely deaf, completely broke, in immense pain through different physical ailments, but to still be able to create things of beauty, that shows, I think, that artists of that caliber, and I'd put Tom Petty at that same level, are capable of creating. So, and it's I can't remember who said this. Rick Rubin, I think, it's the album has a diary-like aspect, in that it reflects a point in an artist's life that you can't ever get back again, right? So you can write great songs, you can write great albums, but if you can really sort of channel who you are at that point, then it just elevates it to something completely different. My last notes would be so I've made an argument before on social media that I think Wildflowers might be the last truly great album that's been made by a mainstream, but a major recording artist. I can't really think of anything quickly that surpasses it, and not too many things that match it since it was released. Because it's a perfect selection of 15 songs, and of course, obviously, all the rest are also some fantastic. Harry Green and California and 13 Days and all these tracks. Well, 13 Days ended up on She's the One, but I just think that it's in every way a perfect album. Cinematically, it's also, the documentary is also superb, in that at first you're watching a film. For the first sort of 5 minutes or so, you're set up and you're watching a film and you're watching something from the outside. But the way that it's put together, you're sucked into the room more and more and more and more, where you really feel just like a fly on the wall watching this thing come to life. The aesthetic is managed beautifully. So you get this art piece, but you also get Tom back again for 90 minutes, and we get Howie back a little bit, and so there's that sort of emotional, sentimental connection to the documentary that makes it just a special experience. And the last thing that I really the last note I've made here is that it is a memoir. It's not a musical biography. We had that already with Running Down a Dream, where we chronicle Tom's early life and his progression through the Heartbreakers and blah 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 blah. Really, this is about a very singular point in his life and about one album that meant an incredible amount to Tom and means an incredible amount to most of Tom's fans. And I think that most petty heads would say that this is in the top 2 or 3 albums he ever recorded. I can't imagine anyone saying that it isn't. So yeah. So those are my thoughts on Somewhere You Feel Free. Like I said, I wanted to try and do this a little bit more off the cuff and a little bit more spontaneous, just to see how it feels and see how it goes. Let me know in the comment sections and what have you, if you thought it was okay or if it's absolute crap. I might do it again, I might not. We'll see how it goes. But don't forget to follow me. I'm going to do my little script thing here now. Don't forget to follow me on Facebook, Instagram, at The Tom Petty Project, and on Twitter, at Tom Petty Project. And of course, you can find me on YouTube. So follow, like, subscribe, all those boring things, because they really do help. They help me sort of get the word out there, and they help me build my listenership and make things more wide-ranging as we talk about Tom's music. Until we meet again next week, keep listening to Tom's music and keep talking about Tom's music. Try to be kind. Try to say I love you to someone at least once a day. Stay safe and healthy. And I'll be back with you next week to talk about the first track from side 2 of the second album, I Need to Know. Not a bad song, eh? Okay, bye-bye.